We were excited to come to DC for this unique experience for a Hill visit and a rally to be added on to the annual conference, and I think the timing is quite appropriate with where we are in the current landscape, with 25 companies invested in Duchenne and so much happening. So for the advocacy training for the next hour and a half, we are going to bring you through kind of the advocacy history, some of which you heard already, but it's important to repeat, and get you prepared for your Hill visit. And also, Annie Kennedy is going to give us an update on some of her, the policy initiatives she's in charge of that we're initiating and have been working on. And then Anessa Faisenfeld, our chairman, is going to actually come up and say a few remarks about advocacy. And we're just going to get you ready for your Hill visits. We're also holding an Duchenne rally, as you know, in the morning to kick off the day. And it should be a wonderful day. So when we take a look back at our early advocacy efforts, when we knew we needed to create a strategy in Washington, we were an organization founded by parents, led by Pat Furlong, asking a lot of questions. And if anyone knows Pat Furlong, she's persistent and asks a lot of questions. I know because I work for her. And we were asking questions that may seem simple at the surface, but were much more complex at their core. You know, what was the current state of care and research? What was missing in the space to move to actual treatments? What opportunities exist for change, and what could we do collectively as a community to create that change? And there was a lot of missing pieces of the puzzle at the time when you looked at the landscape. There were no care standards. The lack of the robust funding necessary to really enable drug development at the time. We had no outcome measures to test these drugs when they came. Lack of data about the population, natural history data, surveillance data. Industry was absent from the space. And the federal government really wasn't invested in Duchenne. Very minimal investment in the muscular dystrophies overall. And we needed more of a mobilization of the community. So in those early days, many of our families were writing letters to Congress, just telling them about Duchenne and how it impacted their lives and about the need to do something. But the messages weren't very consistent. And we didn't know Washington very well as an organization of parents and families. So we hired a firm called Fagre BD Consulting, who we are still with to this day, led by Dave Zook and Nick Minetto, because they understood Washington. They knew how things worked and how to make things happen. And one of the first things we did is we had Duchenne included in an important piece of legislation called the Children's Health Act. And this was a pediatric research piece of legislation that really got our foot in the door and put Duchenne at least within this bill. And Pat then begged the NIH to hold the first workshop ever on Duchenne. They agreed. And really the result of that workshop was an understanding that there needed to be a much more intense focus, more funding and investment by the federal government on the muscular dystrophies and on Duchenne. So really the game changer, and you've heard this before, we'll say it again, this was a pivotal moment for our community, and this changed everything. The MD Care Act passed in 2001 really did, it started everything off, and all the progress that we've made to date can be really traced back to the passage of this bill and the subsequent versions. And the bill created centers of excellence to conduct important research for drug development, created a MD StarNet tracking surveillance system so we can better understand the data of the population, and it created an MD coordinating committee and an action plan, which is actually in the process of being updated. The bill was reauthorized in 2008, and then in this past fall of 2014, against all odds, when Congress really wasn't doing much of anything our advocacy community managed to pass amendments to that bill, and it's been remarkable. And it's been because of your work. So this really did make the tide turn. And the results of these bills have been remarkable. We have care considerations that are actually being updated again. We have Wellstone Centers of Excellence that have yielded tremendous research that has enabled drug development. For instance, for the exon-skipping therapies, there was major work done, toxicology studies on animals that then it really did push it to the next level to get industry involvement. You can see a direct result of the work done at the Wellstone Centers that translates to the therapies that we're now seeing in clinic. The research plan for the MDs, we had one research plan that was written and now in the process of being, well, actually was updated and should be coming out soon. I hope. I'm looking at Annie Kennedy because she's on a committee. And, Duchenne is well characterized now, which is really important for developing therapies. We have outcome measures, and we're building on those, and natural history studies. So the pieces of that puzzle that were missing really did start to come together. And the money, which is oh so important. The MD Care Act is not a funding bill. So when we go to Washington, we also lobby for specific funding. And over the years, we've been able to secure close to, well, over $400 million for Duchenne specifically through the National Institutes of Health, the CDC, and the Department of Defense, which you heard earlier has a specific Congressional Medical Research Fund and has been pivotal to then leveraging billions of dollars with industry investment. So can't say enough how important that has been. And all along, the most important piece of this puzzle has been you, advocating, telling your story. This shows a bit of the advocacy cycle. Advocates go to the Hill. They really express their just their family story, how Duchenne impacts their son, their lives, themselves. Congress is a reactive body. They work for you. They set priorities. And this has turned into action, federal investment policy changes. This really works, and this is something you all have done and can do if you haven't done it yet. And I ask you, I implore you to join us in Washington. And I know many of you will be on the Hill with us tomorrow. So we're in a new era of Duchenne, and an era of clinical trials, companies, investors, and the FDA. And it's an exciting time, but we still all know that many of our patients do not fit into inclusion criteria. So while we've made a lot of progress, there's still a lot of work to be done. And we really have to continue the momentum we started with the original MD Care Act. And in this new era, the real heroes have been the patients that have participated in these clinical trials. They are trailblazers, and I honestly give them a round of applause because they've been incredible, incredible heroes to our community. And families wish, watch, and they hope. So here's the pipeline, and you've seen this slide already, but it's exciting to see, of course. And you can trace back really much of the work done, the investment made by the federal government to really each and every one of these. It's touched each and every one of these in one way or another. And we have so many that they fit on 2 slides now. And you're going to hear more about these in the coming days. And I'm not going to pretend to explain them. I'm not a scientist. But with this, we've had to come up with a more strategic regulatory strategy. And these 3 letters have become the 3 most important letters to our community and our lives. And I know WTF also goes with these letters for many of you. But with that said, with this new regulatory strategy, new questions arise. Does the FDA understand Duchenne? Do they understand the unmet medical need and the urgency? Are there ways that we as a community can improve the process? And what opportunities exist to impact review? We're always looking at the opportunities that exist that the advocacy community can impact. So in 2012, a big opportunity arose with the passage of a bill called FDASIA. They love acronyms, Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act. Now, you don't need to memorize all of these things. You just need to have this as a background. And the point of all this is that we've been building tools over time to speed the development of therapies. And when we see opportunity, we seize it. And this bill was an FDA-related bill that allowed for opportunity where provisions were included specific to rare disease that we advocated strongly for. One was on accelerated approval, and it really codified it and improved it to make it more available for rare diseases. There was a breakthrough therapies designation, which allowed for greater interactions between companies for a therapy that was considered a breakthrough therapy. And one company, Presenza, now BioMarin, actually did apply for that designation. And then patient-focused drug development, which I'm sure you've heard this term before, PFDD. Once again, they love putting those letters together. But this initiative, we felt, was extremely important because this brought about a mandate for more patient engagement in drug development in the review process and within the FDA. So with patient-focused drug development, the FDA was mandated to hold 20 meetings with 20 disease groups, and we knew that Duchenne most likely wouldn't be chosen as one of those groups. So being the community that we are, we aggressively pursued our own avenues and to create our own tools. And one of those tools actually revolved around just this white paper outlining why Duchenne fits into accelerated approval. We made recommendations to the FDA around accelerated approval and how Duchenne fits into the new provision within FDASIA. Those recommendations were around expanding the use of it for rare disease and Duchenne, issue clearer guidance around the level of evidence for surrogate endpoints, pilot the use of adaptive approvals, and then give greater weight to the demonstrated benefit-risk preferences of patients. Speaking of benefit-risk, we initiated a benefit-risk study, the first of its kind, where we wanted to come up with ways to convert the patient voice into usable data for the FDA. We were telling the FDA that our community was willing to accept higher risk, and they said that's all well and good, but we have no data to back that up. So we teamed up with Johns Hopkins University, and Holly PA from PPMD led a pilot study where we surveyed parents and we gave them treatment scenarios and they had to make choices. And through statistics, and I'm no statistician, the experiment worked. And in the end, the conclusions of this study reached were that caregivers were willing to accept considerable risk for stopping or slowing the progression of Duchenne, which you'll probably say, well, duh. But the FDA speaks in terms of data, and this is why we presented this to them. We've talked about expanding this into trying to come up with data regarding uncertainty and what meaningful benefit is. So we're in discussions on new studies. But paired with this, we did a Tell Your Story tool where we allowed anybody to submit their story to the FDA. If the FDA was sitting across from you, what would you want them to know? What would you say to them? So we deleted all the curse words, and we came up with a nice piece that are actually going to be delivered to all the Senate offices for our Hill visits called The Patients Are Waiting. And really the themes that came out of those stories, those 170 personal stories, they matched up with the data that we saw within the benefit-risk study. So these are tools that we've been using and have been presenting to the agency. So direct engagement, we've been meeting with the FDA ongoing now for almost 5 years, talking to them about the high unmet medical need, the urgency, the need for flexibility, just trying to educate them about Duchenne. And Pat had mentioned earlier that the EMA came out with a guidance on Duchenne, which we felt really didn't include the patient voice. And when we went to the FDA in one of our meetings, we said, well, you know, we're working with the EMA to try to improve their guidance. We think you should also do a guidance to harmonize efforts. And they said, no, there's 7,000 rare diseases. Why don't you do a guidance? And we're like, okay, we'll do a guidance. And we soon realized, then we said, well, what's a guidance? And we soon realized that this would be a big undertaking. But to really start the process off, we did a policy forum where 19 members of the FDA were present. We had parents from across the country come and testify. We had experts on a range of topics. And it was a remarkable day, and the FDA still talks about that policy forum. You know, I had mentioned earlier that the FDA was mandated by Congress to do those 20 meetings with different disease groups. This is not one of those meetings, but they actually cite this meeting as being one of the most productive. So this set the stage for the Duchenne community to do a draft guidance, which we completed in 5 months and submitted in June 2014. And it covered benefit risk, clinical trial design, biomarkers, natural history. We did a imperatives group, which really was the patient voice on all these topics, and then diagnostics. And this was a consortium of over 80 experts in the field, and they were broken down into these working groups, and it was a consensus document. And you know, we were really proud of it, and we completed it rather quickly. And the FDA put it up for public comment, and as you know, and has been cited several times today, the FDA released the first ever draft guidance based on a patient guidance last week, which is just incredible. They did mention that this would be a companion to the Duchenne community's draft guidance, that our guidance will stand on its own so that we can update it as the science evolves. This will be an important tool for us, for both the FDA and industry. The guidance highlights, which we'll go more into tomorrow as well, they stress the importance of collecting data across the broad spectrum of patients, something that we put into the imperatives, because as we know, the window for criteria for inclusion is quite narrow. And we need to broaden that. They encourage multiple endpoints and use of biomarkers. They acknowledge the understanding of risk tolerance, and we do believe that this was a result of the work on benefit risk. We think they could go farther in it, and we plan to hold another meeting to discuss this guidance. And to bring the patient community in again to make it better, because it's open for public comment still. It actually just opened for public comment. I believe it's 60 days, Annie. So, and they acknowledge the potential for accelerated approval, which is what we want, and it's what was in our white paper. So we're pleased, but we're reading through it very carefully, and we're going back to the working groups. And along with the draft guidance that we did, we had a community advisory board oversee the entire process, and that included 22 foundations from the space and then 22 unaffiliated parents and patients. And we're going to be going back to the community advisory board and having them go through it as well so we can comment on this document. So these documents are very important, and these are more tools in our arsenal. So results. It's been an incredible 15 years for this community, passing major legislation, aiding in ensuring rare disease provisions for FIDASIA, launching the benefit risk study, creating that community guidance, and then the FDA in turn turning around their own guidance, which is rather remarkable. Federal funding, $400 million. Awareness is really at an all-time high for Duchenne. We had the first conditional approval of a drug in Europe for Translarna, which was a pivotal moment again. And our End Duchenne movement is in full swing. And I think you see that on social media. You see that here. You hear that with industry, and you see it in the numbers of industry partners. And Duchenne is a priority to the federal government. And it's because of the work we've done as a community, as advocates. Again, something you all can do. You know, when you look at the pivotal moments in our timeline, the Gene Discovery, MD Care Act, FIDASIA, the draft guidance, Translarna, you know, the next pivotal moment will hopefully be a US approval, and 21st century cures. These moments have transformed us into a movement, and it's a powerful movement. So I think we all should be proud and keep the momentum going. So you're all part of this movement. We have an incredible Duchenne community, and I can't stress, there are over 50 foundations in the space all doing incredible work. Not one group deserves credit for the progress made to date. And if any group tries to say, well, it's because of us that we did this, they're either lying to you or they're naive. We've seen incredible awareness, documentaries, campaigns, and, you know, I think that we all agree on the majority of these messages. We may have different tactics, but we're all moving in the same direction, and I think we're making tremendous progress because of it. I did want to put in a plug for our State Captains Program. We launched this earlier this year, and it's on our website, but we've had, I think we have around 27 states. If you're not familiar with advocacy and you feel like you're interested in getting involved, we have, each state has their own captain who can help mentor you, tell you what advocacy is all about, and tell you about creating relationships with your members of Congress, which is what is key to really continuing to move the needle in this collective effort. So, End Duchenne Rally and Hill Day, we'll go into that in a little bit. The rally, we need those going to the rally to be there at 9 a.m. in the morning. And there'll be one meeting on the Senate side for those who signed up for the Hill Day. And then we sent out several reminders. I know many people came up to me, can I still do it? If you pre-registered, you'd be able to do the Hill meeting. But you can still come to the rally, and we'll go into details on that in a bit. And the February Advocacy Conference, you know, tomorrow's kind of a taste of what that's all about. I really, really, really stress that we need more people coming to this conference. I had a mother who's been going to the advocacy conference now for 11 years, and she said, Rye, we need to see new faces. I'm tired, and we need new blood. We need to create more champions on the Hill, and the only way we're going to do that is for more people to participate and come to Washington. So that's my plug for that as well. So next up, my friend, my colleague, Annie Kennedy, to go over some of our new initiatives and then to talk about the ask. What are we asking Congress to do?